This all happened back in 2018 when I moved into a small two-story house in England with my boyfriend at the time. The neighborhood was one of those quiet little cul-de-sacs where all the houses were packed closely together, facing each other. So there wasn't much privacy. I've always been more of an introvert, so I didn't go out of my way to make friends. Still, I exchanged the usual pleasantries with the neighbors when I ran into them, nothing more than a casual good morning or a polite nod here and there. One of those neighbors was Greg, an older guy who lived directly across from us. From the start, he was overly friendly. One of those people who'd stop you for a chat that would drag on far too long, forcing you to come up with some excuse to escape. At first, I figured he was just a lonely guy who liked to talk. And while he could be annoying, he didn't seem weird. Not exactly. He'd share stories about the neighborhood, make notes of people's birthdays, and even invited my boyfriend and me to a garden party he was hosting. I wasn't too keen on going, but I appreciated the gesture. His house was directly across from mine, and I couldn't help but notice how our windows lined up perfectly. If I left my blinds open, I had a clear view into his house, and he had a clear view into mine. A couple of years passed, and during that time, my boyfriend and I split up. I never actually told the neighbors about it, but it was probably obvious when his car disappeared from the driveway for good. He moved out of the country, though we stayed friends and kept in touch. Living alone felt strange at first, so I decided to adopt a cat to keep me company. He became my little shadow, always following me around the house. Around this time, Greg started becoming more of a nuisance. Anytime I left or returned home, he'd find an excuse to flag me down and start a conversation. It got old fast, but I'd humor him for a few minutes before finding a way to escape. I'd joke about these weird interactions with my ex, telling him about all the times Greg would randomly stop me for long-winded chats. One time, Greg knocked on my door to drop off 2 parcels that had been left at his place by mistake, one of which was a large table. He said he'd go back and grab later. I happened to be in the middle of a raid in Elder Scrolls Online at the time, doing a deathless speed run for an achievement. So I was on a time crunch. I quickly told him to just leave the parcel by the door and that I'd keep it unlocked so he could drop the other one off when he got it. I went back to my desk, put my headset on, and focused on the game. A few minutes later, I heard my front door open, followed by the sound of something being set down. Then footsteps. I turned around, and there was Greg, standing behind me, just watching me play. I didn't want to mess up my run, so I stayed focused on the game. But I could feel him standing there. It was unsettling. When we finally beat the boss, I took off my headset, and Greg's face lit up like he'd just witnessed the most exciting thing in the world. He kept going on about how incredible it was to watch me play, how he'd never seen anyone use a keyboard like that before. He practically begged me to teach him how to play, rambling on and on while swaying slightly. I could tell he'd been drinking. I laughed it off and gave him a vague answer, hoping he'd take the hint, but he didn't. He just kept standing there, completely ignoring my subtle attempts to get him to leave. Eventually, I stood up, walked over to the door, and opened it, making it very clear that the conversation was over. He hesitated for a moment, looking a little disappointed. But finally, he left. That should have been my first real warning sign. Now, in the UK, everyone has their own individual outdoor bins for trash, which we have to roll out to the street for collection and bring back in afterward. I started noticing that my bins were always being brought back in before I even had the chance to do it myself. I figured maybe I was blocking someone's car and a neighbor was just being helpful. But then I realized someone had also been using my bins. One day, Greg stopped me for another one of his impromptu chats, and I casually mentioned that someone had been putting their trash in my bin. He acted surprised and said the same thing had been happening to him. Something about the way he said it didn't sit right with me. So I decided to set up a little experiment. I taped an old phone with a surveillance app to my window, pointing it at the bins just to see who was doing it. And big surprise, it was Greg. Instead of confronting him, I let it go, assuming he was just struggling with the new bi-weekly trash collection schedule. But something about it still bugged me. Then Christmas rolled around, and things took an even stranger turn. One night, I heard a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and I didn't have a peephole, so I just opened it without thinking. There was Greg, standing there with a red gift bag in his hands. I immediately smelled alcohol on him. Before I could even say anything, he held the bag out and said he had a Christmas present for me. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "I really want to give you a kiss on the cheek, but I can't. Not with this pandemic going around." Before I could even react, he ignored his own words and kissed me on the cheek anyway. I was so caught off guard that I just stood there for a second, trying to process what had just happened. He kept talking, dragging out the conversation, and I had to firmly tell him that I was busy and needed to go. Finally, he left. When I opened the gift later, I felt even more unsettled. Inside the bag were 2 bottles of Belgian beer, a half-eaten can of sour cream, and onion, Pringles, and a small plastic bag of chocolates. I immediately recognized the chocolates. They had been given out by a neighbor with young kids who'd made little holiday treat bags for everyone in the cul-de-sac. Greg had literally re-gifted them to me. He hadn't even removed the handwritten note from the original givers. After that, I decided I was done being polite. Not long into the new year, I ordered some food delivery. Just a few minutes after it arrived, there was a knock at my door. I knew it wasn't the driver he'd already left, so I immediately got a bad feeling. And then it clicked. Greg always showed up right after I got deliveries. He was watching my house. I ignored the knock and went upstairs out of sight. That night, he came back and knocked again. Once again, I ignored it. The next day, I contacted the police and filed a harassment report. I wasn't sure if I was overreacting, but I just wanted something on record in case things escalated. A few days later, Greg knocked again, acting all concerned, saying he was worried about me. That's when I finally told him, directly, I think it's best if we don't have any contact going forward. His response chilled me. I just wanted to be your friend. A year passed without incident. Then one night, I saw a shadowy figure lurking near my driveway. My instinct screamed at me to go back inside. A few months later, I found Greg crouched outside my kitchen window, watching me. I screamed at him, and he just stood up casually and asked, "Are you all right?" I called the police immediately. Turns out Greg had a history of stalking women. They arrested him, but all he got was a caution. He wasn't allowed near my house anymore. And thankfully, that was the last time I ever had to deal with him. I moved far away, and I never want to see him again. I live in a tiny town, the kind where everyone knows everyone, and word travels fast. If someone so much as sneezes too loud at the grocery store, the whole town hears about it by dinner. So in October of 2013, when people started whispering about a new guy moving in next door, I paid attention. The biggest piece of gossip: he had just gotten out of prison for a sex crime and would be registering as a sex offender. As a single woman living alone and with some very personal past traumas, that news put me on edge. But aside from the town rumors, no one really knew much about him. So I told myself I'd keep an open mind. At first, I was actually one of the few people defending him. I kept saying, "Hey, we don't even know what he did. People can end up on that list for dumb things, like public urination." But the reality is, they don't usually go to prison for that. Still, I wanted to be fair, so I avoided making any judgments before meeting him. Now, let me paint a quick picture of my apartment layout so you understand how things played out. My main entrance is a hidden side door, tucked away by some bushes. My driveway is right next to it, and my neighbor's house sits directly beside mine. His front door basically faces my entrance, so if I wasn't careful, I'd end up running into him every time I came or went. And trust me, I went out of my way to avoid that. For weeks, I crept around my own apartment just to keep from meeting him, even though I was still telling people to give him a chance. Then one morning, I was heading to my car for work when, bam, he suddenly popped out from behind the bushes. It startled me so badly, I just froze. But he introduced himself, so I did the same, trying to keep things polite. He offered to trim the bushes between our places, which was such a weird thing to bring up that I didn't know whether to laugh or be creeped out. I just shrugged it off and told him I wasn't sure what my landlords wanted to do with them. Then, at some point, the truth about his past came out. He had been in prison for attempted rape, along with a bunch of assault and battery charges. The story went like this. He was out at a bar with friends. There was a group of women also drinking there, and one of them started feeling sick. She went to lie down in her friend's car outside. He followed her. You can guess where it went from there. That was all I needed to hear. I stopped making excuses for him after that. Now keep in mind, our little town is right in the middle of a school district. There's an elementary, middle, and high school just up the road. A lot of parents were furious that he was living here. But since his crime wasn't against a minor, there weren't any legal restrictions stopping him. His parents moved in with him at first, and I got the distinct feeling they were just trying to settle him in before ditching him on the rest of us. And that's exactly what they did. In early November, I got into a car accident. Not a major one, but enough to shake me up. That afternoon, while I was at home recovering, my neighbor walked into my workplace and started asking my boss all kinds of weird questions about me. First, he wanted to confirm that I worked there, which was odd, because I walked to work all the time. He had to have known. Then he started referring to me in this possessive way that creeped my boss out. My neighbor. I met her. Mine. Me, mine. My. She told me later that his eyes were darting all over the place, like he was casing the store. She got a terrible feeling from the whole encounter. Then he mentioned he had to bring me a care package. Let me tell you, that was the last thing I wanted. Thankfully, the care package never came, but that didn't stop the weirdness. A few days later, he walked into my workplace again, this time ordering breakfast. He acted completely casual, then looked me dead in the eye and said, "Oh, I didn't know you worked here." At that point, I knew for sure. This guy was watching me. Then, right before Thanksgiving, his parents left. They just packed up and left him there alone the day before the holiday. While I wasn't exactly a fan of the guy, even I had to admit that was pretty messed up. But their departure set off a chain reaction of even more unsettling behavior. Before he had already been watching me a little. After they left, it became constant. If I left for work in the morning, he was at his front door watching. If I left in the afternoon, there he was standing outside, waving. If I came home at night in the pitch dark, yep, he was still there, lurking. It was relentless. Then came the candy incident. On Thanksgiving Day, he went around to every single house where a woman lived alone and left 3-pound bags of M&Ms as a gift. I didn't answer my door, but that didn't stop him. He went upstairs to my landlord's entrance, introduced himself, and asked her to make sure I got my candy. At that point, I'd had enough. I talked to a female police officer, the only female officer in our tiny town, and she advised me to start logging everything. The police also agreed to do nightly checks near my place during their rounds. My landlord even cleared a space for me in a different garage so I could park somewhere less visible. That way, I wouldn't have to walk past his house just to get to my door. Things started calming down a little, but I still felt uneasy. Someone even got me a can of pepper spray. And don't laugh. I also had a samurai sword. Was it overkill? Maybe. Did it make me feel safer? Absolutely. But deep down, I was still scared, especially when I found out that on top of everything else, he had military training. Then one night, one of my co-workers spotted him, just sitting outside our workplace, long after closing time. He wasn't doing anything, just sitting there. And when he noticed that someone was watching him, he tried to slip away into the darkness, like it was no big deal. I'm just relieved that I see him less these days. Since I started parking in the garage, I've managed to avoid him more. But every now and then, he still comes into my work, buying the most random things, and lingering just long enough to make people uncomfortable. My boss has a rule now. Whenever he shows up, I go hide in the back. And the worst part, he knows I do it. Because now, he just stalls and waits to see if I'll come out. I don't know what his deal is. Maybe he truly doesn't get why no one in town wants him around. But I do, and as long as he's still here, I'll be watching him just as closely as he watches me. My boyfriend and I were just hanging out in the living room, watching a movie, enjoying a quiet night. I was 8 months pregnant at the time, and my kids, 5 and 7 years old, were sound asleep down the hall. Everything felt totally normal until we heard a knock at the door. When my boyfriend peeked out the window, we saw it was Roger. Now Roger was this older guy, probably in his 50s or 60s, who lived alone. We'd met him a few months earlier and had even helped him with some flooring in his kitchen. He always seemed nice enough, just kind of a quirky, chatty guy. He once casually mentioned that he was a dealer, said he had pounds of weed in his car. We laughed it off, like, "Okay, Roger, you do you." We never got any weird vibes from him until that night. So we opened the door, not thinking much of it. But the second it swung open, Roger stepped inside. No hesitation. Right away, I could tell something was off. He wasn't his usual friendly self. He looked agitated, like he was barely keeping it together. As he moved toward the kitchen table, I caught a glimpse under his sweatshirt, and my blood ran cold. He had a massive hunting knife tucked in his waistband and a baseball bat. I didn't say anything right away. I just froze, trying to process what I was seeing. My boyfriend had no clue. He sat across from Roger at the table, asking if he was okay, if he needed help with something. And that's when Roger lost it. He started yelling about how the people at my house aren't happy with you ranting about the flooring we'd helped him with. He kept saying my boyfriend needed to come with him right now to fix it, or these mysterious people would be angry. At one point, he even brought up my kids. That sent me into full panic mode. I told him they were sleeping and he needed to leave. There was no way my boyfriend was going anywhere with him. Things escalated fast. My boyfriend could tell Roger was getting aggressive, even though he still didn't know about the weapons. Trying to keep things calm, he quickly stood up and said, "All right, man, let's go check it out." The plan was simple: get Roger out the door and lock it behind him. It almost worked. They made it to the door. My boyfriend turned to look at me, just for a second, and in that moment, Roger shoved him hard. My boyfriend stumbled into the doorway, and before he could react, Roger slammed the door shut, trapping me inside. Alone. I immediately grabbed my phone and called 911. While I was trying to explain what was happening, the operator told me to go outside. I hesitated. Roger had a knife. What was I supposed to do? Just wander around in the dark while a lunatic was threatening my boyfriend? But the operator insisted, so I stepped out onto the deck. And they were gone. It was eerily quiet, like they had just vanished. It hadn't even been a full minute. I just stood there, heart pounding, completely helpless. Then, out of nowhere, wild pounding on the door. I ran to open it. My boyfriend flew inside, eyes wide, looking like he'd just escaped a horror movie. And in his hand was a mystery axe. Even the 911 operator was like, "Wait, what is going on?" Apparently, the second they got to the street, Roger pulled out the knife and started screaming that he was going to cut your head off. For the people at my house. My boyfriend didn't hesitate. He bolted, sprinting through backyards, hopping fences, doing whatever he could to lose Roger. At some point, he grabbed an axe from someone's yard. Because what else was he supposed to do? The cops finally showed up. We ended up having a court date. But it was a joke. We just sat outside the courtroom until someone came out and told us it was over. Roger was there, wearing some oversized suit, like a kid playing dress-up. No one told us if he was actually arrested or what happened next. All we knew was that he was back home the next day, still living in the same cul-de-sac. My kids had to wait for the bus at the same spot where he walked by every morning.